Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder if what happens in your brain when you get a reward or a loss can actually tell us something about feeling sad later on, especially when you're really young? This new study dives deep into that question, looking at the brains of little kids and their feelings. They found some really interesting clues that could help us understand depression much earlier in life. So, the big question here is, can we see early signs of depression by looking at how young children's brains react to rewards and even losses? We know that depression can start appearing even when kids are just toddlers or preschoolers, but most of what we learn about brains and depression comes from older kids and adults. This study wanted to see if we could spot something in the brains of kids as young as 4 years old that might be linked to feeling down. Think about it. When a child gets a treat, their brain should light up, right? Especially in certain areas that are known to be involved in feeling good and getting motivated. The researchers in this study suspected that if a child's brain doesn't react as strongly to those good feelings, or if it reacts oddly to bad ones, it might be a signal that they are more at risk for feeling depressed. They specifically focused on a couple of brain areas. One is the amygdala, which is kind of like our brain's alarm system for important feelings, whether they are good or bad. They looked at how reactive it was to rewards or losses compared to just a neutral feeling. They also looked at the caudate nucleus and the medial prefrontal cortex, which are super important for processing rewards. So how did they test this with little kids? Well, they used a special MRI machine that is designed to be kid-friendly. Before the scan, the children got to see videos and even do a practice run so they wouldn't be too scared. Then, inside the MRI machine, they played a simple game called the doors guessing task. Imagine this. A kid sees two doors. They pick one by pressing a button. Then they get feedback. They might get a reward like extra candy, or maybe nothing, or even a small loss of candy. The researchers weren't really measuring how many candies they got, but what was happening in their brain while they were seeing these different outcomes. They were specifically looking at the brain activity, the signal called BOLD, in those selected areas like the amygdala, caudate, and medial prefrontal cortex. They measured how active these brain areas were during the reward versus neutral condition, and also for salience, which means how much they reacted to both rewards and losses compared to neutral. And crucially, they had parents fill out questionnaires asking about their child's depressive symptoms at the start of the study. Then, about a year later, they did it all again, checking in on those same kids and their depressive symptoms. This allowed them to look at what was happening at the same time and what might predict future feelings of sadness. So, what did they find? It is pretty fascinating at the beginning of the study when they looked at how reactive the kids' brains were to rewards and losses compared to neutral. They saw something important. Children whose left amygdala was less reactive to these important feelings, to rewards and losses, tended to have more depressive symptoms right then. It's like their brain's important feeling detector wasn't as sensitive to emotional events. And it wasn't just the amygdala, the right caudate, which is really involved in processing rewards, and the medial prefrontal cortex also showed similar patterns. When these areas were less active in response to just rewards compared to neutral, the children also tended to report more depressive symptoms at that same time. This suggests that a blunted or lower response to rewards and emotional salience in these key brain regions is linked to feeling more down in early childhood. But here is where it gets especially interesting. They also checked in a year later. What they discovered is that for a child's right caudate activity, at the start of the study, a lower response to rewards predicted higher depressive symptom severity. A whole year later, this is huge. It means that this specific brain reaction, this difference in how the right caudate responds to rewards, could actually be a predictor of future feelings of sadness. This is really powerful because it means we might be able to identify kids who are at risk for developing more persistent depressive symptoms much earlier than we previously thought, just by looking at their brain activity during simple reward-based tasks. It's like finding an early warning sign in the brain. The study authors also noted that the amygdala's association was more with how kids were feeling at that moment, whereas the caudate's connection was more predictive of how they might feel in the future. Now, like any study, it is important to acknowledge its limitations. They had a good number of kids for the initial part, but about a third of the participants didn't provide data a year later. While they did check to make sure the kids who dropped out weren't too different from those who stayed, it's always a possibility that a more complete follow-up could have revealed slightly different patterns. Also, the study focused mainly on how the brain reacted to rewards. Future research could look at how the brain responds during reward anticipation, meaning what happens before the reward is even given, as that has been linked to depression in older age groups. And while they did their best to get a diverse sample, they did note that certain racial and lower-income groups were underrepresented. which is something to keep in mind when interpreting the findings. So, what does this all mean for us? For starters, it really gives way to the idea that early childhood is a critical time for understanding depression. It suggests that how young children's brains process rewards and emotional events might be a key piece of the puzzle. The finding about the right caudate being a potential predictor is particularly exciting. It opens up possibilities for earlier interventions and support for children who might be at risk. Imagine being able to identify a child's potential vulnerability by observing their brain's response to simple, engaging tasks. This research is a step towards building a more complete picture of how depression develops. It highlights that our brains are wired in complex ways, and these early patterns of reactivity can have lasting effects. It's a reminder that we need to pay attention to the mental well-being of even our youngest children, and that science is giving us more tools than ever to understand and help them. It's pretty amazing to think that a simple game in a big scanner could tell us so much about a child's future emotional health. This study really emphasizes the importance of early brain development and how it connects to later mental health outcomes. What's next is really about refining these methods, seeing if we can predict depression even more accurately, and most importantly, how we can use this knowledge to help children who are struggling. What are your thoughts on this research? Does it make sense to you that brain activity related to rewards could be linked to feeling sad? Let me know in the comments below, and if you found this helpful, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more dives into the fascinating world of psychology and neuroscience. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.